They buried her alive in a frozen barn and left her to die. But the winter storm that should have killed her brought the one man who refused to let her perish. This is the story of Elira Vane, a healer hunted by her own town, and Garrick Thorne, the mountain lumberjack who risked everything to save a woman the world wanted dead. If you stay with me until the end, you'll discover how a starving outcast became stronger than the fear that tried to destroy her. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The barn door hung crooked on rusted hinges, scraping against ice every time the wind slammed it open. Elira Vane didn't have the strength to close it anymore. She sat wedged between rotting hay bales, knees pulled to her chest, watching her own breath turn white in the air. Her fingers had gone numb 3 days ago. Or maybe it was 4. Time stopped meaning much when you were waiting to die. The silver pendant around her neck, the last thing her husband gave her before the mob beat him unconscious, felt heavier than it should. She'd thought about burying it in the snow so the townspeople wouldn't find it on her frozen corpse, wouldn't melt it down and profit from the only proof that someone had once loved her. But her hands wouldn't cooperate. They just sat there in her lap, useless and pale. Outside, the blizzard screamed. Elira closed her eyes and tried to remember what warmth felt like. Real warmth. Not the feverish kind that came before frostbite took your toes, but the kind that lived in kitchens where bread was baking and children laughed and husbands kissed their wives goodnight. She'd had that once, a lifetime ago. Back when people knocked on her door because they needed medicine, not because they wanted to burn her house down. The storm rattled the barn walls. Snow forced its way through gaps in the wood, piling up in corners like it was claiming territory. Elira wondered if they'd find her body in spring or if the wolves would get to her first. Probably the wolves. That seemed fitting somehow. The town of Black Hollow had already torn her apart while she was still breathing. Might as well let the animals finish the job. She'd stopped crying 2 weeks ago. There wasn't any point. Tears didn't change what people believed, and they sure as hell didn't keep you warm. Her mind drifted back to the day it all fell apart. It started with the Hendricks boy. 7 years old, fever so high his mother thought he'd burn up from the inside. Elira had spent 2 days at their bedside, brewing willow bark tea, cooling his forehead with wet cloth, whispering the old remedies her own mother had taught her before the fever finally broke. The boy lived. His mother wept with relief and promised Elira anything she needed. 3 weeks later, that same mother stood in the crowd outside Elira's house, screaming that the healer was a witch. It happened fast after that. The cows started dying. Then the Miller twins got sick. Then old Zachary Pruitt collapsed in the general store and didn't wake up for 2 days. Every time something went wrong, the whispers got louder. It's that mark on her neck. My grandmother said marks like that mean the devil touched you. I heard she talks to herself at night, probably casting spells. Elira had tried explaining. Disease spreads. Livestock dies. People get old and fragile. None of it had anything to do with the birthmark she'd been born with, or the fact that she knew how to brew medicine from plants most people thought were weeds. But fear doesn't listen to logic. Vernon Pike, town councilman, land speculator, the kind of man who smiled while he lied, stood on the church steps and told everyone that Black Hollow was cursed, that evil had taken root among them, that the only way to save themselves was to cut out the rot before it spread. He didn't say Elira's name. He didn't have to. The mob came at sunset, 40 people, maybe more, carrying torches and farm tools sharpened into weapons. Elira's husband, Thomas, met them at the door with his hunting rifle and told them to get off his property. He was a quiet man, Thomas. Worked the lumber mill, kept to himself, never caused trouble. But he loved his wife, and that made him dangerous to people who needed someone to blame. They beat him with axe handles and fence posts until he stopped moving. Elira tried to run to him, but rough hands grabbed her arms and dragged her backward. Someone spit in her face. Someone else called her a demon. Vernon Pike stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, watching like he was supervising a barn raising instead of a murder. "Get them out of here," Pike said. His voice was calm, reasonable, like he was discussing the weather. "Take them north, let the wilderness deal with them." They threw Thomas and Elira into a wagon and drove them 15 miles into the frozen hills before dumping them on the side of a logging road. Thomas wasn't moving. Blood soaked through his shirt. His breathing came in wet, rattling gasps. Elira begged them for help, begged them to at least leave her medical bag, begged them to show mercy. They took her bag, her coat, and the food supplies from the wagon. Then they rode away without looking back. Thomas died 3 hours later. His last words were, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." Elira buried him in shallow snow with her bare hands. She didn't have tools, didn't have prayers, didn't have anything except grief so heavy it should have crushed her into the ground alongside him. But somehow, she kept walking. For 2 weeks, she stumbled through the wilderness, eating pine needles and bark, drinking from half-frozen streams, sleeping in caves and under fallen trees. Her dress froze stiff, her hair matted with ice. The hunger became so constant she stopped noticing it, the same way you stop noticing a ringing in your ears. Then she found the barn. It wasn't much, half the roof missing, walls warped and splitting, but it blocked the wind, and that was enough. Elira crawled inside and collapsed. She told herself she'd rest for a few hours, then keep moving. That was 5 days ago. Now she sat waiting for the end, watching snow pile up through the gaps in the walls. Her thoughts moved slow, like syrup in winter. She wondered if Thomas was waiting for her somewhere, wondered if the afterlife had a place for women accused of witchcraft, wondered if dying from cold was painful or if you just got sleepy and slipped away. The barn door exploded inward. Elira flinched, instinct jerking her body sideways even though she barely had the energy to move. Wind and snow roared into the barn like a living thing, and through the white chaos, a massive shape filled the doorway. A man. Not just any man. A giant. Easily 6.5 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to block the storm behind him. He wore a heavy fur coat crusted with ice and carried an axe slung over one shoulder like it weighed nothing. Frost clung to his dark beard. His eyes, sharp and pale, scanned the barn until they landed on Elira. He froze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Elira's heart hammered against her ribs. Some distant, half-dead part of her brain screamed at her to run, to hide, to do something, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The man took a step forward. His boots crunched on frozen straw. "You're alive," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Elira tried to answer, but her throat wouldn't work. All that came out was a cracked, pathetic sound. The man's expression shifted, not quite surprise, more like grim recognition. He lowered the axe and shrugged a canvas pack off his shoulder. "When's the last time you ate?" She stared at him. He crouched down, moving slow like he was approaching a wounded animal. Up close, she could see the scars on his face, one cutting through his left eyebrow, another along his jawline. His hands were huge, calloused, the kind of hands that spent their life swinging axes and hauling timber. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, "but you're going to die if you stay here." Elira finally found her voice. "Good." The man's eyebrows pulled together. "That right?" "They already killed me." Her words came out flat, empty. "Just taking a while to finish." He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pack and pulled out a cloth bundle. When he unwrapped it, the smell of bread hit Elira like a physical blow. Fresh bread. Real food. Her stomach twisted so hard it hurt. "Eat this," he said, holding it out. She didn't take it. "Why?" "Because you're hungry." "I don't know you. Name's Garrick Thorne. Now you do." He pushed the bread closer. "Eat." Elira's hands shook as she reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the crust, something inside her broke. She shoved the bread into her mouth, tearing off chunks, barely chewing, not caring that she probably looked like a starving animal, because that's what she was. Garrick watched without judgment. When she'd devoured half the loaf, he handed her a water skin. "Slow down, you'll make yourself sick." She drank anyway. The water was cold and clean and tasted like the first good thing that had happened to her in a month. "Thank you," she whispered. Garrick nodded. He stood up and moved to the barn door, wrestling it shut against the wind. The storm noise dropped to a dull roar. He came back and started building a fire in the center of the barn, arranging broken wood and dry straw with practiced efficiency. "What were you doing out here?" Elira asked. "Checking my trap lines." He struck flint against steel. Sparks jumped into the tinder. "Saw smoke yesterday. Thought maybe someone was squatting in the old Macready place. Figured I'd run them off before they burned the whole valley down. There's no smoke here." "I know that now." The fire caught, small flames licking at the kindling. But I was already halfway here and the storm was coming in, needed shelter anyway. Elira pulled her knees back to her chest. The fire was small, but even that little bit of warmth felt like a miracle. You should leave before the weather gets worse. Storm's already bad. Be suicide to travel now. Garrick fed larger sticks into the flames. We'll wait it out. I meant you should leave me here. He looked at her. Really looked at her, not the quick glances people usually gave before turning away. His eyes were gray, she noticed. The color of winter sky. That what you want? He asked. Elira opened her mouth to say yes, to tell him she was tired and broken and didn't have anything left worth saving. But the words wouldn't come, because sitting here with fire warming her face and food settling in her belly, some stubborn, stupid part of her still wanted to live. I don't know, she said finally. Garrick grunted. It wasn't quite agreement, but it wasn't dismissal either. He settled down across the fire from her, close enough to tend the flames, but far enough to give her space. They sat in silence while the storm hammered the barn. Elira finished the bread. Garrick pulled out a piece of dried meat and chewed it slowly, staring into the fire like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. What's your name? He said eventually. Elira Vane. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe. Or suspicion. You're the healer from Black Hollow. Her whole body tensed. You know about that? Word travels. Even up here. He tossed another stick on the fire. Heard they ran you out, said you were cursing people. Elira waited for the accusation. The fear. The moment when he'd realized he'd made a mistake helping her. Instead, Garrick said, My mother was a healer too. Was? They killed her when I was 12. His voice didn't change, but his jaw tightened. Said she was communing with dark spirits. Really, she just knew which plants could break a fever and which ones would kill you. People don't like women who know things. Elira felt something crack open in her chest. Not quite hope, more like the absence of loneliness. I'm sorry. Long time ago. He looked at her across the flames. I know what fear makes people do. Seen it up close. So if you're waiting for me to drag you back to Black Hollow and collect some kind of reward, you can stop worrying. I don't work for people like that. Then what do you want? Right now, to not freeze to death. He pulled his coat tighter. Beyond that, I guess we'll figure it out when the storm breaks. The fire crackled. Wind screamed outside. Elira felt exhaustion pulling at her, the kind that came from weeks of running and starving and waiting to die. But for the first time since Thomas stopped breathing, she wasn't alone. Why help me? She asked. Garrick was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Because somebody should have helped my mother, and nobody did. Elira didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and let the fire warm her frozen hands. The storm lasted 3 days. Garrick kept the fire going, rationed out food from his pack, melted snow for drinking water. He didn't ask invasive questions, didn't push her to talk, just existed in the space beside her like a mountain, solid, unmovable, indifferent to the chaos around him. On the second day, Elira's hands thawed enough that she could feel her fingers again. The pain was excruciating. She bit down on her sleeve to keep from screaming. Garrick noticed. Frostbite? She nodded, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. He moved closer, gently taking her hands in his. His palms were warm and rough. He examined her fingers carefully, pressing on the tips, checking for blackened skin. You'll keep them, he said. Might lose a nail or two, but you'll keep the fingers. How do you know? Seen enough frostbite to recognize it. He released her hands and dug through his pack, pulling out a small tin. This'll help. The salve smelled like pine and something sharper. Medicine. He rubbed it into her hands with surprising gentleness for someone so large. You made this? Elira asked. My grandmother taught me, before she died. He worked the salve into her cracked skin. She was from the mountain tribes north of here. Her people knew medicine the way most folks know breathing. Is that where you live, with the tribes? Near them. I've got a cabin about 10 miles west, close enough to trade, far enough to be left alone. Sounds lonely. Garrick's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Lonely's better than dead. On the third day, the storm finally broke. The wind died. The snow stopped falling. Weak sunlight filtered through gaps in the barn walls. Garrick stood and looked out through a crack in the door. "We need to move." Elira struggled to her feet. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. "Where?" "My cabin. You can't stay here and you're in no shape to travel far." He turned to look at her. "Unless you've got somewhere else to go." She didn't. The only home she'd ever known had burned her effigy in the town square. Her family was dead. Her husband was buried in unmarked snow. She had nothing except the clothes on her back and a silver pendant worth maybe $3. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "Didn't ask if you wanted to be. Asked if you had somewhere to go." "No." Then it settled. He started packing up his gear. "Can you walk 10 miles? Honestly, Elira wasn't sure, but she nodded anyway because the alternative was giving up, and apparently that stubborn part of her wasn't ready to quit yet. They set out an hour later. The snow was deep, up to Elira's knees in places, and every step felt like dragging weights behind her. Garrick moved ahead, breaking trail, his long legs and heavy boots making it easier for her to follow in his footsteps. The wilderness stretched out around them, vast and white and silent. Pine trees sagged under the weight of snow. Frozen streams cut through the landscape like veins of ice. No roads, no houses, no signs that humans had ever existed here. Elira focused on putting one foot in front of the other. When she stumbled, Garrick was there, catching her arm before she fell. He didn't say anything, just steadied her and waited until she could walk again. By midday, her legs were shaking. By afternoon, she was half delirious, seeing Thomas's face in the shadows between trees. Garrick called a rest and made her drink water and eat a piece of dried venison. "Not much farther," he said. "You said that 2 hours ago." "And I was right. It's not much farther now than it was then." Despite everything, Elira laughed. It came out broken and half crazy, but it was still a laugh. Garrick almost smiled again. They reached the cabin just before sunset. It sat in a clearing surrounded by massive pines, smoke curling from the chimney. Wait, no, there was no smoke. The place was dark. Garrick cursed under his breath. "Stay here." He moved forward slowly, axe in hand, approaching the cabin like it might attack him. Elira watched from the tree line, confused and frightened. What was wrong? Garrick circled the building, checked the windows, then kicked open the door and disappeared inside. A moment later, he reappeared. "It's fine. Thought maybe—" He shook his head. "Never mind. Come on." The cabin was small but solid. One room with a stone fireplace, a loft for sleeping, shelves lined with supplies. A real bed sat in one corner, a table and 2 chairs in another, furs and blankets piled near the hearth. "Home," Garrick said simply. Elira stood in the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed. The stranger had shared his food, guided her through a blizzard, brought her to his home, and she had nothing to offer him in return except trouble. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice cracked. "You don't owe me anything." Garrick set his axe down and started building a fire. "Maybe I'm tired of living alone. Maybe I'm just too stubborn to let someone die when I can prevent it. Does the reason matter?" "It might." He struck flint, coaxed flames from kindling. "Then how about this? You're a healer. I'm a lumberjack. Winter's long up here and accidents happen. Maybe having someone around who knows medicine isn't the worst idea." It was practical, logical, a fair trade, but Elira saw the truth in the way his shoulders tensed, in the way he wouldn't quite look at her. Garrick Thorne wasn't helping her because it made sense. He was helping her because 13 years ago nobody helped his mother, and he'd been carrying that weight ever since. "Okay," she said quietly. He nodded. "There's a basin behind the screen if you want to wash up. Water in the barrel. I'll heat some for you." That night, Elira slept in a real bed for the first time in a month. The mattress was stuffed with pine needles, and the blankets smelled like wood smoke, but it felt like luxury. She buried her face in the pillow and tried not to think about Thomas, about Black Hollow, about the fact that somewhere out there, Vernon Pike was probably congratulating himself on getting rid of the problem. In the main room, Garrick sat by the fire, sharpening his axe with long, rhythmic strokes. He didn't sleep much, Elira would learn, kept watch like he was expecting something to come through the door. And 3 days later, something did. Elira woke to voices outside. Angry voices. Men's voices. She sat up, heart hammering. Through the cabin window, she could see torchlight flickering between the trees, shapes moving in the darkness. Garrick was already at the door, shotgun in his hands. "Stay down," he said quietly. The voices got louder, closer. Then someone pounded on the door. Garrick Thorne! The voice was familiar. Vernon Pike. We know you've got her in there. Send out the witch, and we'll leave you in peace. Elira's blood turned to ice. They'd found her. Garrick didn't move from the door. The shotgun stayed level in his hands, barrel pointed at the wood like he could shoot through it if he needed to. Outside, horses stamped and snorted. Leather creaked. Men muttered to each other in voices that carried the ugly confidence of a mob that thought it had already won. I know you can hear me, Thorne, Vernon Pike called out. His voice had that same reasonable quality Elira remembered from the church steps, like he was discussing crop prices instead of demanding a woman's life. We don't want trouble with you. Just hand over the witch and we'll be on our way. Elira pressed herself against the wall beside the fireplace, trying to make herself small. Her hands shook. The warmth she'd felt for the past 3 days, the safety, the stupid, fragile hope that maybe she could survive this, evaporated like steam. How many? Garrick asked quietly, not looking at her. She peered through a gap in the shutters. Torchlight made it hard to count, but she saw at least 8 riders, maybe more hanging back in the trees. 10, maybe 12, he grunted. Not good odds, but he didn't look surprised. Pike's voice came again. We tracked her through the snow, Thorne. We know she's in there. You harboring a fugitive makes you complicit in her crimes. What crimes? Garrick's voice was loud enough to carry through the door, flat, hard. Being good at her job? Knowing which plants cure fever? Witchcraft, conspiracy with dark forces, the murder of livestock and corruption of the water supply. That's bullshit, and you know it. A different voice cut in, younger, angrier. My brother died because of her. She cursed our family. Your brother died because he drank from a creek that runs past the mine, Garrick shot back. But that doesn't fit your story, does it? Silence outside. Then Pike again, colder now. We're not here to debate. Send her out, or we'll come in and get her. Garrick finally looked at Elira. His gray eyes were calm, measuring. There's a trapdoor under the bed. Leads to a crawl space beneath the cabin. You can fit. They can't. What about you? I'll handle this. There's 12 of them. I said I'll handle it. He jerked his chin toward the bed. Go. Now. Elira didn't move. Her feet felt nailed to the floor. They'll kill you. Maybe. But they'll definitely kill you if you don't hide. He turned back to the door. I've dealt with worse than Vernon Pike. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him this was insane, that no stranger was worth dying over, that he should just hand her over and save himself. But the words stuck in her throat because she'd already watched one man die trying to protect her, and the thought of watching it happen again made something inside her chest crack open. Go, Garrick said again, quieter this time. Elira moved. She crossed to the bed, dropped to her knees, and felt along the floor until her fingers found the edge of the trapdoor. It lifted with a creak that sounded impossibly loud. Below was darkness and the smell of cold earth. She lowered herself through the opening just as Pike's voice came one more time. This is your last chance, Thorne. We're coming in. The trapdoor closed above her head, and the world went black. The crawl space was maybe 3 feet high and ran the length of the cabin. Dirt floor, stone foundation walls, roots dangling from the floorboards above. Elira pressed herself against the cold stone and tried to control her breathing, tried not to think about being buried alive, tried not to imagine Garrick's blood soaking through the floorboards. Above her, boots hit the porch. Heavy footsteps. Then Garrick's voice, muffled but clear enough. That's far enough. You gonna shoot all of us, mountain man? That was Pike, smug, confident. Don't need to shoot all of you, just need to shoot you. A pause. Elira heard it, the tiny shift in the mob's energy. Pike was the center, the one holding them together. Without him, they were just scared men a long way from home in the middle of the night. You're making a mistake, Pike said, less confident now. First smart thing you've said all night, turn around and go home. We have authority. You have a mob. That's not the same thing. Garrick's voice didn't rise, didn't waver. And you're on my land. That means I've got authority here. Now get off my property before I start making examples. Someone in the back shouted, We just want the witch. There's no witch here. Just a woman you people are too scared and stupid to understand. She killed my livestock, another voice yelled. Your livestock died because you're too cheap to pay for decent feed and too lazy to clean your water troughs. But blaming a healer's easier than admitting you're a shit farmer, isn't it? Elira heard angry muttering, footsteps shuffling. The mob was losing cohesion, frustration pulling them in different directions. Then Pike's voice cut through, sharp and commanding. Search the cabin. She's in there somewhere. I wouldn't. Garrick's tone went flat. Dead. The voice of someone who'd already decided what he was willing to do. First man through this door loses his head. You can't stop all of us. Don't need to stop all of you. Just need to make it cost more than you're willing to pay. A pause. How about it, Vernon? You willing to die for this? Because I promise you'll be first. The silence stretched out. Elira dug her fingernails into the dirt, every muscle locked tight. She couldn't see anything, couldn't do anything except listen and wait and hate herself for putting Garrick in this position. Finally, Pike spoke. We'll be back, with more men, legal authority. Looking forward to it. You're signing your own death warrant, Thorne. Wouldn't be the first time. More muttering, horses moving, leather creaking, then hoofbeats, slow at first, then faster as the mob retreated into the forest. Elira stayed frozen in the crawl space, not trusting it. Any second they'd come back. Any second the door would crash open and hands would drag her out and the trapdoor lifted. Garrick's face appeared, lit from behind by firelight. They're gone. She didn't move. Elira, they're gone. She finally exhaled, a shaky breath that turned into something close to a sob. Garrick reached down, grabbed her arms, and hauled her up out of the darkness. Her legs gave out the moment her feet touched solid floor. He caught her, held her steady until she could stand on her own. You okay? He asked. You almost died. But I didn't. They'll come back. You heard Pike. Let them. Garrick moved to the window, peered out into the darkness. They won't try anything tonight, too spooked. But yeah, they'll come back, eventually. Elira wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. I should leave, before someone gets killed because of me. Too late for that. They already know you're here. Running now just makes you easier to catch. So what? I just hide here until they give up? They're not going to give up, Garrick. Vernon Pike doesn't lose. He'll bring the law, bring more men. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. He turned from the window, his expression unreadable. You asked me why I'm helping you. You want the real answer? She nodded. My mother didn't just die. They burned her, tied her to a post in the town square, and set her on fire while people watched and cheered. His voice stayed level, but his hands clenched. I was 12 years old, and I stood there and did nothing. Couldn't do nothing. Too small, too weak, too scared. Elira felt something crack in her chest. I swore I'd never stand by like that again, Garrick continued. So no, you're not leaving, and yes, they might come back. But this time someone's going to stand between the mob and the woman they want to burn. Even if it's just me. She didn't know what to say. Didn't have words for the weight of that confession, for the raw pain underneath his controlled exterior. So she just nodded and let the silence settle between them. Garrick checked the door, barred it with a heavy oak beam, then moved around the cabin securing shutters and loading extra shells into his shotgun, preparing for a siege that might come tomorrow or next week or never. Elira sat by the fire and stared at the flames. Her mind raced through possibilities, through plans and escape routes and desperate schemes. None of them worked. Pike had resources, authority, the weight of the town behind him. What did she have? A mountain man with a death wish and borrowed time. There's another option, Garrick said, interrupting her thoughts. What? My grandmother's people, the mountain tribes I mentioned. He sat down across from her, firelight cutting shadows across his scarred face. They live 3 days north of here, past the high passes. Black Hollow's authority doesn't reach that far. You want to take me there? I want to give you a choice. We can stay here and fight, or we can go somewhere Pike and his mob can't follow. Elira turned that over in her mind. Running again, always running, but this time running towards something instead of away. Would they take me in? Your grandmother's people? Maybe. Probably. They're not like the valley towns. They judge people by what they do, not what they're accused of. And if they don't accept me? Garrick shrugged. Then we figure something else out. There was that we again. Like her survival had become his problem too. like he'd decided they were in this together whether she wanted it or not. "When would we leave?" she asked. "Dawn, before Pike works up the courage to come back with reinforcements." He stood, moved to the shelves, started pulling down supplies. "We can travel fast if we travel light. 3 days to the passes if the weather holds. And if it doesn't, then it takes longer." Elira watched him work, this stranger who kept saving her life for reasons that were tangled up in his own trauma and guilt. Part of her wanted to tell him to stop, to let her go, to save himself the trouble. But a larger part, the part that had clawed its way out of that frozen barn, wanted desperately to live. "Okay," she said, "we leave at dawn." Garrick nodded like he'd expected that answer. He kept preparing, packing dried meat and hardtack into canvas bags, rolling up blankets, checking his weapons. Efficient, practiced. A man used to leaving quickly. Elira tried to help, but her hands still ached from frostbite and exhaustion made her clumsy. After she dropped a water flask for the third time, Garrick gently took it from her. "Get some sleep," he said. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch." "Garrick, I don't sleep much anyway. Old habit." He gestured toward the bed. "Go on." She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion won. Elira collapsed onto the mattress fully clothed and fell into a dark, dreamless sleep that felt more like passing out than resting. She woke to gray pre-dawn light filtering through the shutters and the smell of coffee boiling over the fire. Garrick sat at the table, sharpening a long hunting knife with steady, rhythmic strokes. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Morning," he said without looking up. Elira sat up, her body protesting every movement. "Did they come back?" "No, but they will." He tested the knife's edge with his thumb, nodded in satisfaction, and sheathed it. "We need to move." They ate a quick breakfast of cold cornbread and coffee, then stepped out into the frozen morning. The world was gray and white and silent. No birds singing, no wind, just the crunch of their boots in the snow and the mist of their breath in the air. Garrick locked the cabin door, a futile gesture, since anyone determined could break it down, and led Elira into the forest. They moved north, following game trails and frozen streams, sticking to the cover of the trees. He set a brutal pace. Elira struggled to keep up, her weakened body rebelling after only an hour. "I need to rest," she gasped. Garrick stopped, turned, assessed her with that measuring gaze. 5 minutes. She collapsed against a tree trunk, lungs burning. Her legs felt like they were made of wet rope. "I'm slowing you down." "You're doing fine." "I'm not. You could move twice as fast without me." "Good thing I'm not without you then." He handed her the water flask. "Drink. Then we keep moving." They pushed on through the morning, the terrain growing steeper as they climbed toward the mountain passes. The trees thinned out. Rock faces appeared, slick with ice. Elira's world narrowed to the simple task of putting one foot in front of the other, following Garrick's broad back through the wilderness. Around midday, he called a halt in a shallow cave that offered shelter from the wind. They ate dried venison and drank snowmelt while Garrick studied the sky. "Weather's changing," he said. "We might get another storm." "How far to the settlement?" 2 more days if we're lucky, 3 if the passes are blocked." He looked at her. "How are your hands?" Elira pulled off her makeshift mittens, strips of cloth Garrick had wrapped around her damaged fingers. The skin was red and angry, but the blackness hadn't spread. "They hurt." "That's good. Means they're healing." He pulled out the tin of salve and applied more to her hands with careful, gentle movements that seemed at odds with his size. "Where did you learn to do this?" Elira asked. "My grandmother. After my mother died, I lived with her people for a few years, learned their ways, how to track, hunt, survive in the mountains, how to make medicine from what grows in the forest." His mouth twitched. "How to be alone without going crazy." "Is that why you live up here? To be alone?" "Partly." He finished with her hands and sat back. "Partly because I don't fit anywhere else. Too much of my mother's people to belong in the valley towns. Too much of my father to belong with the tribes. So I stay in between and pretend that's a choice." Elira heard the loneliness underneath his words, recognized it because she felt it too, that sense of being permanently displaced, of never quite belonging anywhere. "Thank you," she said quietly. For what? For not being afraid of me. For treating me like a person instead of a problem. Garrick looked at her for a long moment. Fear makes people cruel. I've seen it enough times to know better. They rested for another hour, then pressed on. The terrain got rougher, the air thinner. Elira's lungs burned with every breath. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, Garrick pointed ahead. There. That's the first pass. A narrow gap between two massive rock faces, barely wide enough for a man to walk through. Snow had drifted across the entrance, blocking it partially. We'll camp on the other side, Garrick said. There's an overhang that'll shelter us from the wind. They struggled through the pass, fighting through waist-deep snow. Elira's legs gave out halfway through. Garrick grabbed her arm and hauled her forward, half carrying her the rest of the way. The overhang was exactly where he said it would be, a shelf of rock jutting out from the cliff face, creating a protected space underneath. Garrick built a fire while Elira sat shivering, her body pushed past its limits. Here, he handed her a blanket. Wrap up, I'll make something hot. He melted snow in a small pot and mixed in some kind of powder from his pack. The result smelled like pine and mint. Elira drank it gratefully, feeling warmth spread through her chest. What is this? Tea. My grandmother's recipe. Helps with exhaustion and altitude sickness. It's good. It's medicine. Not supposed to taste good. Despite everything, Elira smiled. You're terrible at accepting compliments. Never had much use for them. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful in a harsh, indifferent way. Can I ask you something? Elira said. Garrick nodded. When we get to the settlement, what happens to you? Do you go back to your cabin? He was quiet for a long time. Haven't thought that far ahead. Liar. He almost smiled. Fine. Yeah, I've thought about it. Don't have an answer yet. You could stay with your grandmother's people. Could. But you won't. The cabin's my home. I built it with my own hands. I'm not letting Vernon Pike and his mob of cowards take that from me. Elira understood. Home wasn't just a place. It was the one thing you controlled in a world that tried to control you. Giving it up meant letting them win. What about you? Garrick asked. What happens after we get you safe? I don't know. Start over, I guess. Try to help people who actually want help. Think you can do that? After everything? She considered the question. Thought about Thomas dying in her arms. About the mob that drove her into the wilderness. About Vernon Pike's smug face and the town that turned its back on her. I have to, she said finally. Because if I let them turn me into something bitter and broken, they win. And I'm not ready to let them win yet. Garrick looked at her with something like respect. You're tougher than you look. I'm a healer who spent 2 weeks eating pine bark and drinking from frozen streams. I'm either tough or too stupid to die. This time he actually smiled. Small, but real. They slept that night huddled close to the fire, taking turns keeping watch. When Elira woke for her shift, Garrick was already awake, staring out at the darkness. Thought you were supposed to be sleeping, she said. Couldn't. Bad dreams? Just dreams. He poked at the fire with a stick. About my mother. About the day they killed her. Elira didn't push, just sat beside him and let the silence be enough. After a while, Garrick spoke again. I watched them tie her to that post, watched them pile wood around her feet. She didn't scream or beg, just looked at me and said, "Don't let this make you cruel." Did it? I don't know. Some days I think I'm exactly what they made me, a man who lives alone in the mountains and trusts nobody. You trusted me. That's different. How? Because you didn't have a choice. Neither did I. He looked at her. Sometimes the world puts two broken people in the same place at the same time and calls it fate. You think that's what this is? Fate? I think it's survival, and sometimes that's enough. The fire crackled. Wind moaned through the pass. Elira pulled the blanket tighter and thought about all the ways her life had shattered and how this man she barely knew had started piecing it back together, one small decision at a time. Thank you, she said again. You already thanked me. I know, but it bears repeating. They sat together through the long night, two people running from the same kind of fear toward an uncertain future. And for the first time since Thomas died, Elira felt something other than grief. Not hope exactly, something quieter, something that whispered she might actually survive this. Dawn broke cold and clear. They packed up and continued north, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner, the wind sharper. Elira's lungs burned with every breath, but she pushed through it, driven by stubbornness and the knowledge that stopping meant dying. By afternoon, they reached the second pass. This one was wider but steeper, the trail winding up between walls of ice-covered rock. Halfway up, Elira's foot slipped on a patch of ice. She went down hard, sliding backward toward the edge of the trail and the 100-foot drop beyond it. Garrick lunged forward, caught her wrist, hauled her back from the edge. They ended up in a heap on the trail, both breathing hard. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, thanks. Be more careful. I'm not explaining to my grandmother how I let you fall off a mountain. Wouldn't want to embarrass you." "Damn right." They made it over the pass just before sunset and found shelter in another cave. This one was deeper, with evidence that people had used it before: charred wood from old fires, a stack of firewood someone had left behind. "We're close," Garrick said, examining the wood. "This is one of the tribe's supply caches. They use it for winter hunting trips." "How much farther?" "Half a day if we start early. We should reach the settlement by tomorrow afternoon." Relief flooded through Elira. She was going to make it. Against every odd, against the mob and the wilderness and her own weakness, she was actually going to survive. That night, they shared the last of the dried meat and talked about small things, childhood memories, favorite foods, pointless arguments about whether coffee or tea was better for staying awake. Normal conversation between two people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side still breathing. "What will you tell them?" Elira asked. "Your grandmother's people, about me. The truth, that you're a healer running from people too scared to see reason, that you need sanctuary." He fed another stick into the fire. "They'll listen. Whether they agree is up to them. And if they don't? Then we figure out plan B. Is there a plan B?" "There's always a plan B. It's just usually worse than plan A." Elira laughed despite herself. "You're strangely reassuring for someone who threatens people with an axe." "I contain multitudes." The next morning, they woke to the sound of voices echoing through the mountains. Elira's heart jumped into her throat. Had Pike's men somehow tracked them? But Garrick was already moving toward the cave entrance, his posture relaxed rather than defensive. "It's okay," he said. "Those are hunting calls. We're in tribal territory now." They packed quickly and set out, following the sound of the voices. Within an hour, they crested a ridge and looked down into a hidden valley. Smoke rose from dozens of cabins clustered near a frozen stream. People moved between the buildings, small figures going about their daily work. "Welcome to Tall Pine Settlement," Garrick said. They descended into the valley, and 3 hunters materialized from the trees, 2 men and a woman, all carrying bows, all watching Garrick and Elira with sharp, assessing eyes. The older of the 2 men stepped forward. His face was weathered, his hair streaked with gray, but he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. "Garrick Thorne," the man said. His voice carried warmth but also caution. "Didn't expect to see you until spring." "Marcus." Garrick clasped the man's forearm in greeting. "I've got a situation." Marcus's gaze shifted to Elira, taking in her worn clothes, her damaged hands, the exhaustion written across her face. "I can see that." "This is Elira Vane. She's a healer from Black Hollow Valley. She needs sanctuary." "Black Hollow." Marcus frowned. "Heard stories from there. None of them good." "The stories are lies," Garrick said flatly. "She's being hunted for crimes she didn't commit. I'm asking the settlement to take her in." Marcus studied Elira for a long moment. She met his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to show the fear churning in her gut. Everything depended on this moment, on whether these people would see her as a person worth saving or a problem not worth the trouble. Finally, Marcus nodded. "We'll hear your story, both of you. Come." He led them down into the settlement, the other hunters falling in behind. People stopped their work to stare as they passed, children peeking out from doorways, women pausing over cooking fires, men lowering their tools. Word spread fast in small communities. By the time they reached the largest cabin at the center of the settlement, Half the village had gathered to watch. An old woman sat outside the cabin, wrapped in furs, her face carved with wrinkles and wisdom. Her eyes, the same gray color as Garrick's, tracked their approach. "Grandmother," Garrick said quietly. The old woman stood, moved forward with surprising speed, and wrapped her arms around Garrick in a fierce hug. "You look terrible." "Missed you too." She pulled back, held him at arm's length, then turned her attention to Elira. Those gray eyes saw everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the desperate hope. "So," the old woman said, "you're the one my grandson risked his life for." Elira swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me why I should let you stay." And standing there in front of the entire settlement, with Garrick beside her and an uncertain future ahead, Elira took a deep breath and started talking. Elira's voice came out steadier than she expected, considering her entire future balanced on the next few minutes. She told them everything, about the sickness that swept through Black Hollow, about the accusations and the mob, about Thomas dying in the snow while she dug his grave with frozen hands. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just laid out the facts like she was presenting symptoms to a patient, clinical and clear. When she finished, silence hung over the gathered crowd. Garrick's grandmother, her name was Kaya, Elira had learned, sat back down on her bench and studied Elira with those unsettling gray eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone. "You say the town blamed you for sickness," Kaya said finally. "But you think something else caused it." "I know something else caused it. The symptoms didn't match any curse or hex. They matched poisoning, heavy metals in the water supply." "And you told them this?" They didn't want to hear it. Fear's louder than logic. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding, some skeptical. Elira couldn't blame them. She was asking strangers to take her word over an entire town's conviction. "Show me your hands," Kaya said abruptly. Elira stepped forward and unwrapped the cloth strips Garrick had bound around her fingers. The old woman took Elira's hands in hers, turning them over, examining the frostbite damage with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen plenty of it. "You treated these yourself?" "Garrick did. With salve you taught him to make, I think." Kaya glanced at her grandson. "You remember something I taught you. Miracles do happen." She released Elira's hands. "You'll keep the fingers. Maybe lose a nail on the left thumb, but that'll grow back." "That's what Garrick said." "Of course it is. I taught him well." Kaya stood again, her joints creaking audibly. "Marcus, your youngest boy still has that cough?" The hunter who'd first met them in the forest nodded. 3 weeks now. We've tried everything." "Bring him here." Marcus disappeared into the crowd and returned minutes later with a boy of maybe 6, small for his age, his breathing raspy and wet. The child looked at Elira with wide, uncertain eyes. Kaya gestured to Elira. "Listen to his chest. Tell me what you hear." This was a test. Elira knew it. Everyone watching knew it. She knelt down beside the boy and pressed her ear against his back, listening to his lungs work. The rattle was deep, congested. Not pneumonia. She'd heard that enough times to recognize it. Something less severe but stubborn. "Breathe deep for me," she told the boy softly. He did, wheezing on the inhale. "Again, good." She straightened up and looked at Kaya. Chest cold that settled deep. Not pneumonia yet, but it could turn if it's not treated. He needs steam treatments twice a day, something to break up the congestion. Mullein tea if you have it. And keep him warm. His body's working hard enough without fighting the cold too. Kaya's expression didn't change. "We've been giving him willow bark for the fever. That's good for pain and fever, but it won't touch the congestion. He needs an expectorant. Mullein's best, but if you don't have it, horehound will work. Or elecampane root if you can find it this time of year." "We have mullein," a woman's voice called from the crowd. "Dried from last summer." "Steep it strong," Elira said. "Let him inhale the steam first, then drink what's left. 3 times a day until the rattle clears." Kaya nodded slowly. "And how long before we see improvement?" 2 days if we're lucky, 4 or 5 if we're not, but he should be breathing easier by tomorrow morning." The old woman turned to Marcus. "Take your boy home. Follow her instructions exactly. We'll see if this healer from Black Hollow knows her trade or just talks a good story." Marcus scooped up his son and headed toward one of the cabins. The crowd began to disperse, conversations breaking out in low voices. Elira stood there feeling exposed, wondering if she'd said the right things or just sealed her own fate. Garrick touched her elbow. You did fine. She's testing me. Of course she is. Would you trust a stranger without proof? Kaya called out before Elira could answer. You too. Come inside. We need to talk privately. The cabin was warm and cluttered with the accumulated possessions of a long life. Dried herbs hanging from the rafters, clay pots lining the shelves, furs piled in corners, tools and implements Elira couldn't identify. A fire burned in the stone hearth. The smell of wood smoke and sage filled the air. Kaya settled into a chair that looked older than she was and pointed at 2 stools. Sit. They sat. Garrick looked comfortable here, like he'd spent countless hours in this exact spot. Elira felt like an intruder. Let me be clear about something, Kaya said, her eyes fixed on Elira. We're not a charity. This settlement survives because everyone contributes. If you stay, you work. You heal our sick, treat our injured, share your knowledge. In return, we feed you, shelter you, protect you. That's the deal. I understand. Do you? Because protection up here means something different than it does down in your valley towns. If Black Hollow sends men looking for you, we don't hand you over, but we don't go to war over you either. We defend our borders, but we're not dying for your fights. Clear? Clear. Good. Kaya poured something dark and steaming from a pot into 3 wooden cups. Now drink this and tell me the truth. All of it, not the sanitized version you gave the crowd. Elira took the cup. The liquid smelled like pine and something bitter. She sipped it carefully, some kind of herbal tea, strong enough to make her eyes water. What do you want to know? Whether you're running from justice or injustice. Whether you actually killed livestock or cursed children or did any of the things they accused you of. I didn't. People always say that. Then why ask? Kaya's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Because I want to see how you answer, whether you get defensive or angry or start making excuses. She set down her cup. You did none of those things. You just stated a fact. That tells me something. What does it tell you? That you're either innocent or the best liar I've met in 70 years. We'll find out which soon enough. Garrick cleared his throat. Grandmother, I wouldn't have brought her here if I thought she was guilty. You brought her here because you see your mother in every woman hunted by a mob. Don't confuse sympathy with judgment. He didn't argue. Couldn't argue, Elira realized, because Kaya had nailed the truth dead center. The old woman turned back to Elira. Marcus's boy isn't the only one sick. We've had a hard winter. 3 elders with joint pain so bad they can barely walk. 2 hunters with infections that won't heal. A pregnant woman who can't keep food down. If you're really a healer, you'll have plenty of work. I'll do whatever I can. See that you do. Because if that boy's not breathing easier by tomorrow, people will start wondering if Garrick dragged home a fraud. Kaya stood, signaling the conversation was over. There's an empty cabin on the east side of the settlement. Small, but it has a fireplace and a decent roof. You can stay there. Garrick will show you. They stepped back out into the cold. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple. Garrick led Elira through the settlement toward a cabin set slightly apart from the others. It was small, like Kaya promised. 1 room, basic furniture, a stone hearth. But after weeks of sleeping in barns and caves, it looked like luxury. It's not much, Garrick said, but it's yours if you want it. It's perfect. Elira touched the rough wooden wall, hardly believing she had a place to stay. A real place, with walls and a roof and a door she could close. I'll bring firewood and food. There's a communal kitchen, but you'll want supplies in case... He stopped himself. In case Pike shows up and I need to hide again. Yeah. Elira turned to face him. You don't have to keep taking care of me. You've done more than enough. I know I don't have to. Then why? Garrick looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Because I'm not ready to go back to that empty cabin yet. Because for the first time in years, I'm actually useful to someone. Pick whichever reason makes you feel better. Before Elira could respond, he turned and walked away, his long stride carrying him quickly across the snow. She watched him go, this complicated man who saved her life, and then didn't know what to do with her once she was saved. That night, Elira lay in her new bed, a simple frame stuffed with pine needles and covered with fur blankets, and listened to the sounds of the settlement, voices murmuring in nearby cabins, a dog barking, The crackle of fires and the whisper of wind through the pines. Normal sounds. Human sounds. The sounds of people living instead of just surviving. She thought about Marcus's boy with his rattling cough, about the test she'd just taken without realizing it was coming, about how much pressure rode on a 6-year-old's lungs clearing up in the next day or two. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by anxiety and unfamiliar surroundings. When dawn finally broke, Elira was already awake and dressed, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. A knock on the door made her jump. It was a woman, maybe 30, with tired eyes and work-roughened hands. "I'm Sarah, Marcus's wife. Kaya sent me to fetch you." Elira's stomach dropped. "Is the boy worse?" "Come see for yourself." They crossed the settlement to Marcus's cabin. Inside, the boy sat propped up on pillows, breathing easier than he had yesterday. The deep rattle was still there, but quieter, less aggressive. His mother stood nearby, holding a steaming cup of Malaine tea. "He slept through the night," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "First time in a week." Elira knelt beside the bed and listened to the boy's chest again. Definite improvement. The congestion was breaking up, moving instead of sitting heavy in his lungs. "Keep up the steam treatments, the tea 3 times a day, and make sure he's drinking water, not just tea. His body needs to flush out what it's breaking loose." "How long until he's better?" Sarah asked. "Another few days, maybe a week, but the worst is past." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She grabbed Elira's hand and squeezed it hard. "Thank you." Word spread fast. By midday, a line had formed outside Elira's cabin. People with complaints ranging from serious to minor, all wanting the new healer to take a look. An old man with knees so swollen he could barely walk. A teenage girl with a gash on her arm that had turned red and angry. A middle-aged woman whose monthly bleeding had become so heavy she was afraid to leave her house. Elira worked through them all, falling into the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and treatment. She had limited supplies, no medical bag, no familiar tools, but the settlement had a well-stocked supply of dried herbs and natural remedies. Kaya stopped by in the afternoon, watched Elira treat a hunter's infected wound, and nodded approval before leaving without a word. By evening, Elira's hands ached and her head pounded from exhaustion, but it was good exhaustion, useful exhaustion, the kind that came from actually helping people instead of running from them. Garrick appeared at her door just after sunset, carrying firewood and a basket of food. "Heard you had a busy day." "News travels fast here. Small community. Everyone knows everything." He stacked the wood beside the hearth. "Marcus's boy is doing better." "He is. That's good. Kaya was watching you treat people. She doesn't say much, but when she approves of something, you know." "How do you know she approves?" "Because she hasn't kicked you out yet." Elira laughed despite her exhaustion. "The bar for success keeps getting lower. That's mountain living for you. You survive the day, you win." He set the food basket on the table. "There's stew in there, bread, some dried fruit. Eat something before you collapse." "You're bossy." "You're stubborn. We balance out." He headed for the door, but Elira stopped him. "Garrick, wait. I wanted to ask, how long are you staying?" He paused, his hand on the doorframe. "Haven't decided yet." "But you're going back to your cabin eventually." "Eventually, yeah. Even though Pike and his men know where you live. Especially because of that. I'm not letting them take what's mine." He looked back at her. "But I'll stay a while longer. Make sure you're settled, that the settlement accepts you." "You don't have to." "I know. You keep saying that. I'm starting to think you actually want me to leave." "That's not what I meant." "Then stop telling me what I don't have to do and just say thank you." Elira felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you." He nodded and left, closing the door behind him. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern. Elira treated the sick, learned the settlement's rhythms, slowly earned trust through steady work and proven results. The old man's knees improved with poultices and careful stretching. The teenage girl's wound healed clean. The woman's bleeding stabilized with herbs that regulated her cycle. Small victories that added up to acceptance. Garrick stayed close, but not too close, helping her gather herbs, teaching her which plants grew where in the mountains, showing her the trails and passes that connected the settlement to the wider world. They fell into an easy companionship built on shared silence and the occasional honest conversation. One afternoon, they were digging through frozen ground for elecampane root when Garrick stopped abruptly, his head cocked toward the wind. "What?" Elira asked. "Listen." She did. At first, nothing. Then she heard it. Horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Garrick's jaw tightened. "Get back to the settlement, now." "What's happening?" "Just go. I'll be right behind you." They ran, crashing through the forest toward Tall Pine Settlement. By the time they burst into the clearing, riders had already arrived. A dozen men on horseback, armed and angry, led by Vernon Pike himself. The councilman sat tall in his saddle, his expensive coat and clean boots marking him as someone used to comfort, not wilderness. He looked around the settlement with poorly concealed disgust. "We're looking for a woman," Pike announced to the gathered crowd. "A fugitive from Black Hollow. We have reason to believe she's hiding here." Kea stepped forward, leaning on a walking stick, but somehow still radiating authority. "This is Tall Pine Settlement. We're not under Black Hollow jurisdiction. You have no authority here. We have a warrant for her arrest. Your warrant means nothing beyond your borders. Turn around and leave." Pike's smile was cold. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, grandmother. The easy way is you hand over Elira Vane and we leave peacefully. The hard way involves us searching every cabin until we find her." Garrick moved to stand beside his grandmother, and Elira's heart stopped. She should run, should hide, should do anything except stand there frozen while people argued over her fate. But before she could move, Sarah, Marcus's wife, stepped forward. "We don't know anyone by that name." Another woman joined her. "Never heard of her." Then Marcus. "You're wasting your time. No one here matches that description." One by one, the settlement residents stepped forward, creating a wall between the riders and the cabins, protecting her, lying for her. These people who barely knew her, who'd only accepted her 3 weeks ago, were standing up to armed men because that's what community meant up here. Pike's expression darkened. "You're harboring a criminal. That makes you accomplices." "Prove it," Kaya said calmly. "I don't need to prove anything. I know she's here." Pike's eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Elira, who'd been trying to blend into the background. "There. That's her. Seize her." Two of Pike's men dismounted, but before they could take a step, every hunter in the settlement had a bow drawn and aimed. The tension ratcheted up instantly, everyone waiting for someone to make the first move that would turn this confrontation into a bloodbath. "Stand down," Pike ordered his men. They hesitated, caught between their boss and a dozen arrows. Elira stepped forward before anyone could get killed because of her. "I'll go. Just don't hurt anyone." "No," Garrick said flatly. "I won't let people die for me. Nobody's dying, and you're not going anywhere." He turned to Pike. "You want her? You'll have to go through all of us." Pike's lip curled. "That can be arranged." "Can it?" Kaya's voice cut through the standoff. "You brought 12 men. We have 40. Your horses are tired from the climb. Ours are fresh. You're in unfamiliar territory while we know every rock and tree. So tell me, Councilman, how do you think this actually ends?" For the first time, doubt flickered across Pike's face. He'd come here expecting intimidation to work, expecting these mountain people to fold under the weight of his authority. Instead, he'd walked into a situation where he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," Pike said finally. "We'll be back with the law." "The law doesn't reach this far, and you know it," Kaya replied. "This is the third time you've come looking for this woman. Third time she's been protected by people who judge her by her actions instead of your lies. Maybe that should tell you something." Pike's face flushed red. "She's a witch, a murderer. She's a healer who's done more good in 3 weeks than you've done in your entire life," Kaya shot back. "Now get off my land before I forget I'm too old to shoot a bow." The stare down lasted another agonizing moment. Then Pike jerked his reins, turning his horse. "Let's go. This isn't worth the trouble." His men followed, some looking relieved to be leaving. They rode out of the settlement at a trot, disappearing into the forest the same way they'd come. Silence held for several heartbeats after they left. Then Kaya lowered her walking stick and turned to Elira. "We need to talk. My cabin. Now." Inside, Kaya's expression was grim. Garrick stood by the door, arms crossed. Elira sat on the stool, feeling like she was about to be judged all over again. "They'll come back," Kaya said bluntly. "Maybe not Pike himself, but someone will. That man doesn't like being told no." "I'll leave," Elira said immediately. "I won't bring trouble down on—" "Shut up and listen." Kaya's tone was sharp. "You're not leaving. That's not how we do things here, but we need to understand what we're actually dealing with. Pike mentioned livestock deaths and sick children. Tell me again, what do you think really caused it? Elira took a breath and laid it out more carefully this time. About the mine upstream from Black Hollow, about the creek that ran through town, the same creek people drew water from, the same creek that watered the livestock, about the symptoms that matched heavy metal poisoning, the tremors, the gut pain, the way children and the elderly got sick first because their bodies couldn't filter the toxins as well. You told them this? Kaya asked. I tried. Vernon Pike shut me down before I could finish. Why would he do that? Because Pike has money invested in that mine. He's part owner. If people found out the mine was poisoning them, he'd lose everything. Garrick swore under his breath. So he blamed you instead. Easier to burn a witch than admit you're killing your own people for profit, Elira said bitterly. Kaya was quiet for a long time, her fingers drumming on the arm of her chair. This is bigger than we thought. If what you're saying is true, it is true. Then those people in Black Hollow are still being poisoned. More will die, and they'll keep blaming you because that's easier than facing the real problem. I know, but what can I do? They won't listen to me. Then we make them listen, Kaya said firmly. But not by running to them with more warnings they'll ignore. We need proof, something they can't deny. How? Elira asked. The creek. If the water's poisoned, we test it. Bring samples back here, see what's actually in them. Then we go to Black Hollow with evidence, not just accusations. Garrick shook his head. That's too dangerous. Pike has people watching, which is why we don't sneak around like criminals, Kaya interrupted. We go openly, during the day. We take samples from the creek, from the mine runoff, from wherever we need to. If anyone tries to stop us, we make sure there are witnesses. And you think that'll work? I think truth has a way of cutting through lies if you shine enough light on it. Kaya looked at Elira. But it's your choice. You can stay hidden up here and be safe, or you can fight to clear your name. Both have costs. Elira thought about the people of Black Hollow, the families she'd treated, the children she'd helped, the neighbors who'd turned on her when fear spoke louder than gratitude. Part of her wanted to let them suffer the consequences of their choices. But a larger part, the part that made her a healer, couldn't stomach the thought of more people dying while she hid in the mountains. I'll do it, she said. Whatever it takes to prove the truth. Kaya nodded like she'd expected that answer. Good. We leave in 2 days. That gives us time to prepare and gather supplies. Garrick, you're coming too. Wouldn't miss it. And we're bringing Marcus and 3 other hunters. Enough to make Pike think twice about starting trouble, but not so many we look like we're invading. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Elira gathered empty bottles for water samples. Garrick checked weapons and supplies. Marcus organized the hunters who'd volunteered to come. The whole settlement buzzed with nervous energy, everyone understanding that what happened next would determine whether Elira stayed or had to run again. On the morning they were set to leave, Sarah pressed a small carved figure into Elira's hand, a pine tree, whittled from light wood. For luck, Sarah said. My son wanted you to have it. He says you saved his life. Elira closed her fingers around the carving, feeling the weight of trust and expectation. Thank you. They rode out at dawn, 7 people on horseback, following the same trails Elira and Garrick had climbed 3 weeks earlier. The journey down was faster than the climb up had been, the horses sure-footed on paths they'd traveled countless times. By late afternoon on the second day, they reached the valley below. Black Hollow sat in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, looking peaceful and normal from far away. You couldn't see the fear and suspicion that lived there, couldn't see the lies festering beneath the surface. They bypassed the town entirely and headed straight for the creek. It ran clear and cold, looking innocent. Hard to believe something invisible could be killing people. Elira dismounted and filled 3 bottles from different points along the creek, one upstream from the mine, one directly below it, and one where the water entered Black Hollow. Garrick kept watch while Marcus and the hunters positioned themselves strategically, ready for trouble. Someone's coming, one of the hunters called out. 3 riders approached from the direction of town. Not Pike this time, younger men, probably hired muscle. They reined in their horses 20 yards away. You're trespassing, the lead rider called out. This is public land, Garrick replied calmly. We have as much right to be here as anyone. You got that witch with you. I've got a healer collecting water samples to test for contamination, that's all. The rider spat into the dirt. Pike said you might show up. Said to tell you the woman's not welcome here. Noted. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're busy. The riders didn't leave, just sat there watching, hands near their weapons, making it clear this was a warning. Elira finished collecting her samples, her hands shaking slightly, but her resolve steady. We're done here, she said quietly. They mounted up and rode back toward the mountains, the three riders following at a distance until the valley faded behind them. Only then did the tension ease, replaced by grim satisfaction. They'd gotten what they came for. Now they just had to prove what it meant. Back at Tall Pine Settlement, Kaya set up a testing area in her cabin. She had knowledge of minerals and metals that went back generations, passed down from healers and craftspeople who understood the earth and what it yielded. Over the next week, they tested the water samples using methods Elira had never seen, burning bits of the water residue and studying the colored flames, dissolving sediment and watching how it reacted with various compounds, comparing the samples against clean water from the settlement's own spring. The results were undeniable. The water downstream from the mine contained levels of arsenic and lead that would slowly poison anyone drinking it. The water upstream was clean. The contamination came directly from the mining operation. This is it, Elira said, staring at the evidence laid out before them. This proves I was right, that the mine is killing them. It proves you were right to us, Kaya corrected. But Pike won't accept our tests. He'll claim we're lying, that we faked the results. Then what do we do? Garrick leaned against the wall, his expression thoughtful. We need someone from outside, someone with no stake in this, someone whose word can't be questioned. Like who? Elira asked. There's a territorial inspector, works for the government. His job is investigating mining operations and enforcing safety standards. If we can get him to test the water independently, Pike will try to stop him, Marcus said. Probably, but that's where we come in. Garrick straightened up. We make sure the inspector gets to Black Hollow safely, make sure he gets his samples, and we make sure there are enough witnesses that Pike can't make this disappear. It was risky, dangerous, everything Elira had been running from for months, but it was also the only way forward. How do we contact this inspector? She asked. Garrick smiled grimly. Leave that to me. I know where he operates. I'll ride out tomorrow, bring him back within the week. And just like that, the plan was set in motion. The woman who'd been hunted as a witch was about to become the one doing the hunting, chasing truth through a town that had tried to bury her alive. Garrick left before sunrise with enough supplies for a 2-week journey. Elira watched him ride out of the settlement, his broad shoulders disappearing into the pre-dawn gray, and felt the absence immediately. She'd gotten used to having him nearby, his quiet presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. He'll be back, Kaya said from behind her. That boy always comes back, even when you wish he'd stay gone a little longer. I'm not worried. Liar. The old woman moved to stand beside Elira, both of them watching the empty trail. You care about him. That's not a weakness, no matter what you're trying to tell yourself. Elira didn't answer. Caring about people had gotten her nothing but pain. Thomas dead in the snow, neighbors turned enemies, a whole town baying for her blood. Safer to keep everyone at arm's length. Except she'd already failed at that. The settlement had worked its way under her skin. Sarah and Marcus. The hunters who'd stood with drawn bows against Pike's men. Even Kaya with her sharp tongue and sharper eyes. And Garrick, most of all, whether she wanted to admit it or not. The week dragged. Elira threw herself into work, treating injuries and illnesses, teaching some of the younger women about herbs and remedies. She tried not to count the days. Tried not to imagine Garrick lying hurt somewhere. His mission failed, Pike's men finding him before he found the inspector. On the 8th day, riders appeared on the southern trail. Elira's heart jumped, too soon to be Garrick returning, which meant either trouble or news. The settlement gathered as the riders approached, tension crackling through the air. But these weren't Pike's men. 3 riders in worn travel clothes, leading pack horses loaded with supplies. Traders, Elira realized. The kind who moved between settlements bringing goods and gossip. The lead trader was a woman with iron-gray hair and a face like weathered leather. She dismounted with the ease of someone who spent more time on horseback than off it. Kaya, the woman said, clasping the old healer's arm. Good to see you still breathing. Takes more than winter to kill me, Ruth. What brings you up here this early in the season? Business, and news you'll want to hear. Ruth's eyes found Elira in the crowd. You the healer from Black Hollow, the one Pike's been hunting? Elira tensed. Yes. Thought so. You've caused quite a stir down in the valley. Pike's been telling anyone who'll listen that you're a witch who cursed his town. But there's other talk too, whispers that don't match his story. What kind of whispers? Ruth glanced around at the gathered crowd, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. 3 more children got sick last week. 2 of them died. The livestock keeps dying no matter how many protective charms people buy from that charlatan who set up shop in the square. And the water, people are starting to notice it tastes wrong. Metallic. Some folks are getting rashes just from washing in it. Elira felt her stomach clench. More deaths. More suffering. And Pike was still covering it up, still blaming her instead of the poison flowing through their creek. Pike's response? Kaya asked. Doubled down. Says the curse is getting stronger because the witch escaped justice. He's convinced half the town that if they'd burned you when they had the chance, none of this would be happening. And the other half? Starting to ask questions, especially the families who lost children. They're scared and angry, and fear only works so long before people start looking for real answers. Ruth pulled a flask from her belt and took a long drink. There's talk of bringing in someone from the territorial government, an inspector or something, but Pike's fighting it. Says it'll make the town look weak. Marcus spoke up from the crowd. We're already working on that. Garrick rode out over a week ago to find the territorial inspector. Bring him back to test the water. Ruth's eyebrows shot up. That's so. Well, you better hope he gets there first, because Pike's also been sending letters to the capital, trying to get official warrants issued. Not just for the healer, for anyone harboring her. He's making this a territorial matter, whether you like it or not. The settlement erupted in angry muttering. Kaya held up her hand for silence. When did these letters go out? 5 days ago, maybe 6. Then we're working against a clock. Kaya turned to Marcus. Double the watches. Anyone approaches from the south, I want to know immediately. Ruth, you and your people can stay the night, but I need you gone by morning. If territorial law is about to show up, I don't want traitors caught in the middle. Understood. Ruth looked at Elira with something like sympathy. For what it's worth, I don't think you cursed anyone. I've been trading these roots for 20 years, seen what mining runoff does to water supplies, seen whole communities poisoned while the owners got rich and blamed everyone except themselves. Pike's got the stink of that all over him. Thank you, Elira said quietly. That night, Elira couldn't sleep. She paced her small cabin, mind racing through scenarios. If territorial law arrived before Garrick returned with the inspector, everything would fall apart. Pike would have her arrested, dragged back to Black Hollow, probably hanged before anyone could prove the truth. The settlement would be implicated for harboring her. People who'd risked their lives to protect her would face consequences. A knock on her door startled her out of the spiral. Sarah stood outside, holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. Thought you might want company. And food. You didn't eat dinner. They sat by Elira's fire, picking at bread and cheese neither of them had much appetite for. You're thinking about running, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. It would be easier, for everyone. Easier for who? Not for the kids in Black Hollow drinking poisoned water. Not for the families who'll keep losing people while Pike covers up the truth. Sarah set down her food. And not for you, running for the rest of your life. Better than getting people killed. We made our choice. Don't insult us by assuming we didn't know what we were doing. Sarah's voice was firm. You saved my son's life. You've treated half this settlement. You think we're going to hand you over to a mob because things got complicated? Elira felt her throat tighten. I can't watch more people die because of me. Then don't. Fight back. Prove what Pike's been hiding. Make him answer for the people he's actually killed instead of the curse he invented. Before Elira could respond, shouting erupted outside. Both women jumped up and ran to the door. People were streaming toward the southern edge of the settlement, torches lighting up the darkness. Riders approaching. A lot of them. Elira's heart stopped. This was it. Territorial law or Pike's men or both, coming to drag her back. She started toward her cabin to grab what little she owned, already planning escape routes through the northern forest. Then she heard Garrick's voice cutting through the chaos. Stand down! They're with me! She ran toward the commotion, pushing through the crowd until she could see. Garrick sat on his horse, looking exhausted and filthy, flanked by two men she didn't recognize. One was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and the rigid posture of someone used to authority. The other was younger, carrying what looked like official paperwork in a leather satchel. "Elira," Garrick called out when he spotted her. "Meet Inspector James Hardwick, Territorial Mining Commission." The older man dismounted, his movements stiff from long travel. He looked around the settlement with sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. When his gaze landed on Elira, she forced herself not to flinch. "Miss Vane," Hardwick said. His voice was clipped, professional. "I understand you've made some serious accusations about the Black Hollow mine operation." "Not accusations. Facts." "We'll see." He turned to Kaya, who'd emerged from her cabin wrapped in furs. "You must be the settlement elder. I'll need space to set up testing equipment, somewhere with good light and access to water." "Use the communal lodge," Kaya said. "It's the largest building we have. Garrick, help him get settled. The rest of you back to your homes. Morning's going to come early." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, everyone shooting curious looks at the inspector and his assistant. Elira stood frozen, unable to process that Garrick had actually done it, had found the inspector and convinced him to come. Garrick dismounted and walked over to her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the new scratches on his hands, the way he favored his left leg slightly. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine." "Let me look." "Later." He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Hardwick's the real deal. Honest, thorough, doesn't take bribes. But he's also a stickler for proper procedure. We need to present this right, or he'll dismiss everything as hearsay." "What does that mean?" "It means tomorrow we lay out the evidence. Your testimony, our water tests, everything. He'll conduct his own tests. If they match ours, he'll expand the investigation to Black Hollow. Official territorial inquiry. Pike won't be able to stop it." "And if the tests don't match?" Garrick's jaw tightened. "Then we're back to square one. But they will match. I know they will." The next morning, Hardwick set up his equipment in the lodge with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times. Glass tubes, chemical compounds, measuring instruments Elira had never seen before. His assistant, a nervous young man named Peter, scurried around taking notes and organizing samples. Kaya presented the water bottles they'd collected from Black Hollow's creek. Elira explained the symptoms she'd observed, the pattern of illness, the way it targeted the vulnerable first. Marcus described what they'd seen when collecting the samples. Garrick laid out Pike's financial stake in the mine. Hardwick listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he simply nodded and said, "I'll need 2 days to run proper tests. Until then, I'd prefer if you all gave me space to work." Those 2 days crawled by like weeks. The settlement existed in a state of suspended tension, everyone waiting for the verdict that would determine whether they'd risked everything for truth or for nothing. Elira tried to keep busy but found herself constantly drawn to the lodge, watching through windows as Hardwick worked with methodical care. The inspector never rushed, never cut corners, just tested and retested, making notes in a leather-bound journal. On the afternoon of the second day, he emerged and asked for a meeting with the settlement council, Kaya, Marcus, Garrick, and Elira. They gathered in Kaya's cabin. Hardwick sat at the table, his journal open before him, his expression grave. "The water samples from Black Hollow Creek showed dangerous levels of arsenic and lead contamination," he said without preamble. "Concentrations high enough to cause serious health problems over time, particularly in children and the elderly. The contamination originates from mining runoff entering the creek approximately half a mile upstream from the town." Elira felt relief and vindication crash over her in equal measure. She'd been right. She'd been right all along. And now someone with authority was confirming it. "What happens now?" Kaya asked. "I conduct an on-site inspection of the mine and the town's water supply. I'll need to collect additional samples, interview residents, document symptoms. If my findings confirm what we've seen here, and I expect they will, I'll issue a formal report to the territorial governor recommending immediate shutdown of the mining operation and criminal investigation into anyone who knowingly concealed the contamination." "Pike won't let you near the mine," Garrick said. "Vernon Pike doesn't have a choice. I have the authority to inspect any mining operation in this territory, with or without the owner's cooperation. He tries to stop me. He's interfering with a territorial investigation. That's a felony." "He'll try anyway," Elira said quietly. He's got too much to lose. Hardwick closed his journal and looked at her directly. Miss Vane, I've read the complaints filed against you. The accusations of witchcraft and cursing. I need you to understand that while my investigation may exonerate you of those charges, it won't erase what happened. The town that blamed you won't automatically accept they were wrong. I know. Some people will apologize. Many won't. They'll find ways to justify their actions, to minimize their guilt. Justice and vindication aren't the same thing. I'm not looking for vindication. I'm looking to stop more people from dying. The inspector studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good, because that's the only thing we can guarantee. They left for Black Hollow the next morning, a strange procession of territorial authority and mountain justice. Hardwick and his assistant in official capacity, Garrick, Marcus, and 3 other hunters as protection, and Elira, riding back toward the place that had tried to kill her. The valley looked the same as she remembered. Rolling hills, scattered farms, the town nestled in the crook of the creek like something out of a painting, pretty from a distance, poisonous up close. They approached from the main road this time, no sneaking or hiding. Hardwick wanted this done in daylight with witnesses. Wanted Pike to understand this wasn't some backwoods accusation, but an official territorial matter. Word spread fast. By the time they reached the town square, a crowd had gathered. Elira saw familiar faces in the mob. The baker who used to give her day-old bread, the blacksmith whose daughter she'd treated for fever, the widow Henderson who'd brought her eggs in exchange for arthritis medicine. They stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to anger to something that might have been shame. Vernon Pike emerged from the town hall, flanked by his hired men. His face went red when he saw Elira. What is the meaning of this, he demanded. That woman is a fugitive. That woman is a witness in a territorial investigation, Hardwick interrupted coldly. Inspector James Hardwick, Territorial Mining Commission. I'm here to conduct an official inspection of the Black Hollow mine and water supply. Pike's face went from red to pale. On whose authority? The territories. Would you like to see the paperwork? Hardwick's assistant held up the official documents. Or would you prefer to be charged with obstruction? The crowd murmured. This wasn't what they'd expected. This was real authority, real power, not just the witch they'd blamed for everything. Pike recovered quickly, his expression shifting to practiced concern. Of course, Inspector, we have nothing to hide. Though I must inform you that our water supply is perfectly safe. Any illness in town has been the result of unnatural causes. Unnatural causes, Hardwick repeated flatly. You mean witchcraft? I mean unexplained phenomena that coincided with certain individuals practicing. Save it. The inspector cut him off. I'm here to test water, not debate superstition. Show me your water source. Pike had no choice. He led them to the town well and the creek that fed it, his hired men trailing behind like dogs who'd lost the scent. Hardwick collected samples with the same methodical care he'd shown at the settlement, labeling bottles, taking measurements, making notes. While he worked, people gathered closer. A woman pushed through the crowd, pale, hollow-eyed, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. You're the inspector? She asked Hardwick. I am. Then you need to know. My daughter died 3 weeks ago. She was 4 years old. The woman's voice cracked. She got sick drinking the water. Started with stomach pains, then she couldn't keep anything down. She died in my arms while they told me it was a curse. Pike stepped forward. Mrs. Brennan, please, this isn't the time. When is the time, Vernon? The woman rounded on him, fury replacing grief. When another child dies? When your pockets are full enough that you can finally admit the truth? I don't know what you're implying. You know exactly what I'm implying. She turned back to Hardwick. Test the water. Test it thoroughly. Because I want to know if my baby died from witchcraft or from poison you people were too greedy to stop. Other voices joined hers. A man whose wife had miscarried. A farmer who'd lost half his livestock. An elderly couple whose grandson couldn't keep food down. All the symptoms Elira had tried to warn them about months ago. All the suffering Pike had blamed on curses instead of contamination. The crowd's energy shifted, fear turning to anger, anger looking for a target, and that target was no longer the healer they'd driven into the wilderness. Pike backed toward the town hall, his hired men closing ranks around him. This is ridiculous. You're all hysterical. We're not hysterical, Mrs. Brennan said coldly. We're angry. There's a difference. Hardwick held up his hand. Everyone calm down. I understand emotions are running high, but mob justice helps no one. I'll complete my investigation and issue findings within 2 weeks. Until then, I'm ordering an immediate suspension of all mining operations pending safety review. You can't do that, Pike protested. That mine employs half this town. Then maybe you should have ensured it wasn't poisoning the other half. Hardwick turned to his assistant. Peter, make a note. We'll need to inspect the mine itself tomorrow morning. Full survey of the operation and runoff management. Pike's expression went from indignant to calculating. Elira saw it. The moment he realized he couldn't bluster or threaten his way out of this. He needed a different strategy. Of course, Inspector, Pike said smoothly. Though I should warn you, the mine's in rough shape this time of year. Flooding from the spring melt, unstable tunnels. Might be dangerous to inspect right now. Perhaps we should wait until tomorrow morning, Hardwick repeated. 9 o'clock. Be there. That night, they camped outside town at Elira's insistence. She wouldn't sleep in Black Hollow, wouldn't accept hospitality from people who'd wanted her dead. They made a cold camp in a clearing, posting guards in shifts. Elira sat by the small fire, unable to settle. Garrick found her there past midnight, still staring into the flames. Can't sleep either? He asked. Every time I close my eyes, I see Thomas. See the mob dragging him away. I keep thinking about all the time we wasted, all the things I should have said to him before he died. Garrick sat down beside her. He knew you loved him. Sometimes that's enough. Is it? Because it doesn't feel like enough. She pulled her knees to her chest. Mrs. Brennan lost her daughter. That little girl died drinking poisoned water while the town blamed me. How many more? How many people suffered because I ran instead of fighting? You didn't run. You were driven out. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, the result's the same. People died while I hid in the mountains. You survived, Garrick said firmly. You stayed alive long enough to bring the truth back. That matters. Does it? Will it bring back Mrs. Brennan's daughter? Will it undo the damage Pike caused? No. But it'll stop more people from dying, and sometimes that's the only justice we get. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The creek burbled past, still carrying its poison toward unsuspecting people downstream. Tomorrow, Elira said quietly, when Hardwick inspects the mine, Pike's going to try something. I know. He has too much to lose, too much money invested. If the mine shuts down, if the truth comes out, he's finished. Men like that don't go down quietly. Then we make sure we're ready. Garrick checked his weapons, knife, rifle, the axe he never traveled without. Hardwick knows the risks. So do Marcus and the others. We're not walking in there blind. Morning came too fast. They rode to the mine at first light, arriving before Pike could prepare whatever surprise he'd planned. The operation was bigger than Elira expected. Tunnels carved into the hillside, equipment scattered everywhere, tailings piles leaking brown sludge directly into the creek. Hardwick stood at the entrance, taking in the scene with growing anger. This is a violation of every safety regulation in the territory. The runoff alone. Inspector Hardwick! Pike rode up fast, his horse lathered from hard travel. I'm afraid there's been a development. Cave-in overnight. The mine's not safe for inspection. How convenient. It's the truth. Ask my foreman. Your foreman who works for you and has every reason to lie. Hardwick's voice was ice. Step aside, Mr. Pike. I'm conducting this inspection whether you like it or not. Pike's hand moved toward his belt, where Elira knew he kept a pistol. Garrick saw it too, and moved his horse between Pike and the inspector, his rifle suddenly across his saddle in a casual grip that was anything but casual. I wouldn't, Garrick said quietly. The tension stretched. Pike's hired men shifted nervously, outnumbered by the hunters Garrick had brought. Nobody wanted to be the first to draw, but everyone knew someone eventually would. Then barking shattered the standoff. A dog emerged from the mine entrance, skinny, matted, limping on 3 legs. Elira recognized it immediately. The stray she'd treated months ago, the one with the infected paw she'd cleaned and bandaged. It had followed her around town for weeks after, loyal in the way only rescued animals could be. The dog saw her and barked again, wagging its tail despite its obvious injuries. Then it turned and ran back into the mine, looking over its shoulder like it wanted them to follow. "What's that about?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Elira said, but something in her gut told her it was important. Against Pike's increasingly frantic protests, they followed the dog into the mine. The tunnels were dark and damp, shored up with timber that looked rotten in places. Water dripped from the ceiling. The air tasted like metal and earth. The dog led them deep into the mine, through twists and turns that suggested whoever had dug this place cared more about finding ore than safety. Finally, they emerged into a larger chamber where the true scope of Pike's operation became clear. Barrels. Dozens of them, stacked against the walls. Chemicals for ore processing, Elira realized, and every single one of them was leaking, the contents seeping into cracks in the rock, running in rivulets toward the underground water table that fed the creek. Hardwick stood speechless, his face going from pale to red. This is criminal negligence on a scale I've never seen. These chemicals, if they're reaching the water supply, they are, Elira said quietly. That's what's been killing people. The inspector turned to Pike, who'd followed them into the mine with his hired men. Vernon Pike, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment, criminal negligence, and conspiracy to conceal public health hazards. Peter, start documenting everything you see. Pike's face twisted with rage. You can't arrest me. I'm a town councilman. You're a criminal who's been poisoning your own community for profit. Hardwick pulled out a pair of iron shackles. Now you can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way. Pike looked around wildly, seeing his options narrow to nothing. His hired men had already started backing away, wanting no part of this. The hunters had their weapons ready. The inspector had the full weight of territorial law behind him. For a moment, Elira thought he might actually surrender. Then Pike grabbed a torch from the wall and threw it at the barrels. The torch spun through the air, trailing sparks like a dying comet. Time seemed to stretch as everyone watched it arc toward the leaking barrels, toward the chemicals that would turn the entire chamber into an inferno if they ignited. Garrick moved faster than Elira thought possible for a man his size. He lunged forward and caught the torch midair, the flames singeing his hand as he threw it to the ground and stamped it out. The smell of burnt flesh filled the tunnel. "Run!" Marcus shouted, already grabbing Hardwick and shoving him toward the exit. But Pike wasn't done. He grabbed another torch and hurled it deeper into the chamber, this one landing among a pile of oil-soaked rags near the barrels. Flames erupted immediately, crawling up the walls, finding purchase in the dry timber supports. "You'll all burn with me!" Pike screamed, his face twisted with something beyond reason. "I built this town. I made it prosper. You can't destroy what I created." The hired men scattered, self-preservation overriding whatever loyalty Pike's money had bought. Garrick grabbed Elira's arm and hauled her toward the tunnel entrance. The dog was already running, its three-legged gait somehow faster than their panicked sprint. Behind them, the fire spread. Timber cracked. Chemical smoke billowed through the tunnels, acrid and choking. Elira's lungs burned with every breath, her eyes streaming tears. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, just followed Garrick's grip on her arm, and trusted he knew the way out. A support beam crashed down, missing Marcus by inches. The hunter cursed and kept running, half carrying Peter, who'd frozen in terror. The young assistant's precious documentation scattered across the tunnel floor, months of evidence lost to fire and smoke. They burst out of the mine entrance into clean air and daylight. Elira collapsed to her knees, coughing so hard she thought her ribs would crack. Around her, others did the same, gasping, retching, trying to purge the poison from their lungs. "Where's Pike?" Hardwick wheezed. They turned to look at the mine entrance. Smoke poured out in thick black clouds. The ground trembled beneath them as supports failed deeper in the tunnels, and Vernon Pike was nowhere to be seen. "He's still inside," one of the hired men said, his voice hollow. "He didn't follow us out." "We have to go back for him," Elira said, already moving toward the entrance. Garrick caught her. "No, you'll die in there." "I can't just let him." "He made his choice." Garrick's grip was iron. He chose to burn it all down rather than face what he'd done. "That's on him, not you." A rumble from deep underground. Then a sound like thunder as the main chamber collapsed, the fire consuming everything Pike had built on lies and poisoned water. Smoke and dust billowed from the entrance, and then the tunnel mouth itself gave way, sealing the mine forever. They stood in silence, watching the destruction. Vernon Pike had gotten exactly what he'd threatened. Everything burned. The mine, the evidence, himself. All of it gone in flames and rubble. "We still have the water samples," Hardwick said finally, "and the tests we already conducted. It's not as comprehensive as I'd like, but it's enough to issue findings. Enough to shut this operation down permanently and investigate who else knew about the contamination." "Pike's dead," Marcus said. "Seems like the investigation ended itself." Pike was one man. But operations like this don't happen in a vacuum. Someone supplied those chemicals. Someone processed the ore. Someone saw what was happening and said nothing. Hardwick's voice was grim. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." They returned to Black Hollow to find the town square packed with people. News of the mine collapse had spread, and with it, the truth that Pike had spent months denying. The chemicals, the contamination, the children who died not from curses but from greed wearing a respectable coat. Mrs. Brennan stood on the church steps, her face hard as granite. "Is it true? Pike poisoned us? All of us?" "It's true," Hardwick confirmed. "The water supply has been contaminated by mining chemicals for at least 6 months, possibly longer. Everyone in Black Hollow has been exposed to dangerous levels of arsenic and lead." The crowd erupted, shouting, crying, rage boiling over after being suppressed by fear for so long. They wanted someone to blame, someone to punish, but Pike was dead, and his hired men had scattered like rats from a burning building. So they turned to each other. "You called her a witch," someone shouted at the baker. "You wanted to burn her." "We all wanted that," the baker shot back. "Don't act like you're innocent. She tried to warn us. She told us it was the water. And we didn't listen because Pike said, 'Pike's dead. What does it matter what he said?'" The argument spiraled, people turning on neighbors, friends accusing friends. The same fear that had united them against Elira now tore them apart as they scrambled to avoid responsibility for what they'd done. Elira watched it unfold with something colder than satisfaction. These were the people who'd beaten her husband to death, who'd driven her into the wilderness to die, who'd hunted her across mountains and threatened the settlement that took her in. And now they were fighting each other, desperate to claim they'd been victims too, that Pike had fooled them, that they weren't really guilty of anything except being scared. "Say something," Garrick murmured beside her. "They're looking to you." "Why should I?" "Because if you don't, this turns into a bloodbath. And despite everything they did, you're not the kind of person who watches people destroy each other when you could stop it." He was right, and she hated that he was right. But Elira hadn't survived this long by letting cruelty define her. She'd survived by being exactly what Thomas had loved about her, someone who healed instead of hurt, even when hurting would have been easier. She climbed onto the church steps beside Mrs. Brennan. The crowd's noise died down as people noticed her standing there. The witch they'd blamed for everything, looking down at them with eyes that had seen them at their worst. "You want me to forgive you," Elira said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "You want me to say it's okay, that I understand you were scared, that Pike manipulated you. You want absolution." Silence. Uncomfortable, guilty silence. "I can't give you that. What you did to me, to my husband, to everyone who tried to tell you the truth, that's yours to carry. Your guilt, your shame, your responsibility. I won't take it from you just to make you feel better." Mrs. Brennan spoke up, her voice rough. "Then what do we do? How do we fix this?" "You can't fix it. Not completely. The people who died are still dead. The damage is done." Elira took a breath. "But you can start by admitting what you did. Not to me, I already know. Admit it to yourselves, to each other. Stop pretending you were all innocent victims of Pike's lies. You chose to believe him because it was easier than questioning your own fear." A woman in the crowd, the widow Henderson, started crying. "We killed your husband. We drove you out to die. How can you even stand there talking to us instead of what? Cursing you? Seeking revenge?" Elira shook her head. "That's what you expected because that's what you would have done. But I'm not you. I'm a healer. I save lives, even lives belonging to people who tried to end mine." She looked out over the crowd, seeing all the familiar faces twisted with guilt and grief and desperate hope for redemption they hadn't earned yet. "Here's what happens now," she continued. "Inspector Hardwick will complete his investigation. The territorial government will provide clean water until your supply can be purified. You'll bury your dead properly and remember why they really died. And you'll live with what you did, because that's the only justice some of us get. And you? The baker asked quietly. What will you do? I'm going back to Tall Pine Settlement. That's my home now. These people standing behind me, she gestured to Garrick, Marcus, and the hunters. They're my family. You had your chance to be my community, and you chose fear instead. That door's closed now. She started to step down, then paused. But if you need healing, if your children are sick from the poison, if anyone's suffering from what Pike did, send word to the settlement. I won't refuse help to people who need it. That's not who I am, even if I wish it was sometimes. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't applaud, just stood there, absorbing the weight of mercy they didn't deserve and judgment they couldn't escape. Hardwick cleared his throat. Miss Vane is right about one thing. You're all suffering from heavy metal poisoning to varying degrees. The territorial government will send doctors and clean water, but the treatment will take months, possibly years for some of you. The damage isn't always reversible. What about our homes? Someone called out. Our farms? Everything here is poisoned. That's a question for the territorial governor. I'll recommend financial assistance and possible relocation for families who want to start fresh somewhere. The water's safe. Hardwick's expression was grave. But I'll be honest, most of you will probably stay. People usually do, even when leaving would be smarter. They'll convince themselves it's not that bad, that they can live with the risk, and some of you will die from it. It was harsh truth delivered without softening, and the crowd received it with the hollow-eyed acceptance of people who'd run out of energy for denial. Over the next week, Black Hollow existed in a strange state of limbo. Territorial doctors arrived with wagons full of medicine and clean water. They set up a treatment station in the town hall and worked through everyone systematically, testing blood levels, documenting symptoms, trying to undo months of accumulated poison. Elira helped despite her declaration that she was done with Black Hollow. She couldn't watch children suffer without intervening, couldn't ignore sick elderly people just because their families had once wanted her dead. Garrick stayed close, watching her work with an expression that was part admiration and part concern. You're allowed to be angry, he said one evening as they walked back to their camp outside town. I am angry. You hide it well, but because being angry doesn't help anyone. It just eats you from the inside until you're as hollow as Pike was. She stopped walking and looked at him. You think I should hate them? Maybe you're right. Maybe I should. But I watched hate turn my neighbors into a mob, watched it kill my husband, watched it almost kill me. I won't let it win by becoming the thing they feared I was. Garrick studied her face in the fading light. You're a better person than I am. No, I'm just tired of losing. He reached out and took her hand, the one with the frostbite scars, the one that had dug Thomas's grave and held dying children and mixed medicine for people who never thanked her. His fingers were warm and rough and steady. When this is done, he said quietly, when Hardwick finishes his investigation and the doctors have done what they can, come back to the settlement with me, not as a refugee, as someone choosing to be there. I already chose that. I mean permanently. Build something that's yours. A healing house, maybe. Somewhere people come because they trust you, not because they're desperate. Elira felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope. She'd learned to be wary of hope, but something close to it. The possibility of a future that wasn't just survival, but actual living. What about you? She asked. Your cabin. You said you were going back. I did say that. But turns out an empty cabin in the woods isn't as appealing as it used to be. His mouth quirked in almost a smile. Especially when there's a stubborn healer who needs someone to chop firewood and keep watch while she saves the world. I'm not saving the world. You saved mine. Close enough. They stood there in the twilight, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow built something worth keeping. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was real and honest and theirs. 2 weeks after the mine collapse, Hardwick completed his investigation. He gathered everyone in the town square to deliver his findings, his official report thick with documentation and damning details. The Black Hollow mine operation violated 17 territorial safety regulations, he announced. The contamination was not accidental, but the direct result of negligent waste disposal prioritizing profit over public safety. Vernon Pike knew about the risks and actively concealed them through intimidation, bribery, and misdirection. His death does not absolve him or excuse the system that allowed this to happen. He paused, letting that sink in. However, Pike didn't act alone. Records recovered from his office show payments to 3 town council members who helped suppress complaints and discourage outside investigation. Those individuals will face criminal charges. Additionally, the mine's suppliers and processing partners are under investigation for their role in providing and handling the toxic materials. The crowd shifted uneasily. More people implicated, more guilt to go around. As for the town itself, Hardwick continued, the territorial governor has authorized emergency funding for clean water infrastructure and medical treatment. A new well will be dug upstream from the contamination site. The existing water system will be purged and tested until it meets safety standards. This will take approximately 6 months. What about compensation? Someone shouted. For the people who died? The livestock we lost? The governor has established a victim fund using assets seized from Pike's estate and fines levied against the mining company's partners. It won't replace what you've lost, but it's something. Hardwick's expression hardened. Though I'll note that the woman you attempted to murder, the one who actually tried to warn you, has declined to file charges against anyone in this town. She asked that any compensation earmarked for her be distributed to families who lost children instead. Every eye turned to Elira. She met their gazes without flinching, without gloating, just stood there, being exactly who she'd always been, a healer who put others first even when they didn't deserve it. Mrs. Brennan stepped forward, her daughter's memory carved into every line of her face. Why would you do that, after everything we did to you? Because your daughter didn't deserve to die any more than my husband did, and because money won't bring either of them back, but it might help you survive losing her. Elira's voice was steady. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and somebody in this town needs to remember what that means. The widow Henderson sobbed openly. Others bowed their heads, unable to face the weight of unearned grace. A few looked angry, as if Elira's mercy was somehow an insult, a reminder that they'd been wrong about her from the beginning. Hardwick rolled up his report. I'll be filing my findings with the territorial capital. This case will be studied, regulations will be strengthened, and hopefully future communities won't suffer the same fate. But that's cold comfort to the people who've already lost everything. He looked directly at the crowd. You all have a choice now. You can learn from this and become better, or you can find new people to blame and repeat the same mistakes. History suggests most of you will choose the latter. Prove me wrong. With that, the inspector mounted his horse and rode out of Black Hollow, taking his assistant and his documentation back to civilization. The town was left to wrestle with its guilt and its future, neither of which promised easy answers. Elira and Garrick stayed 3 more days, helping the territorial doctors complete their initial treatments. Then they packed up and headed north, back toward the mountains and the settlement that had become home. They traveled slower this time, no urgency driving them. The weather was warming. Spring was creeping into the high country, melting snow and coaxing green shoots from the frozen earth. The world was waking up, and for the first time in months, Elira felt like she was waking up with it. You think they'll actually change? Garrick asked as they climbed toward the first pass. Black Hollow. Some of them might. Most won't. People don't like admitting they're capable of evil, so they'll find ways to justify what they did. Tell themselves they were misled or scared or doing what they thought was right. She shrugged. But that's not my problem anymore. You really meant it about being done with them. I meant it. I gave them truth and mercy. What they do with it is up to them. They crested the pass and looked down at the valley beyond. Tall pine settlement visible in the distance with smoke rising from its cabins. Home. You know, Garrick said slowly, when I found you in that barn, I thought I was saving you. You were. But you ended up saving me too. Gave me something to protect, something to care about beyond just existing. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Elira reached over and squeezed his hand. Then I guess we're even. The settlement welcomed them back with a feast that was more enthusiasm than actual food. Sarah threw her arms around Elira and cried. Marcus clasped Garrick's shoulder hard enough to bruise. Even Kaya showed something like affection, pulling Elira aside to inspect her hands and pronounce them adequately healed considering. You did good, the old woman said. Stood up to that mob, proved your case, Didn't let bitterness turn you into the monster they claimed you were. I'm proud of you. Coming from Kaya, those words meant more than any medal or official recognition. Elira felt her throat tighten. Thank you for taking me in, for believing me. I didn't believe you at first. I just believed Garrick's judgment. You earned my trust after that. Kaya's gray eyes were sharp. Now what are your plans? You staying or just passing through? Staying, if the settlement will have me. The settlement already decided that weeks ago. I'm asking what you personally want to do, because there's a difference between hiding here and building a life here. Elira thought about Garrick's suggestion, a healing house, a place that was hers, built on her own terms. I want to establish a proper healing practice. Teach people about medicine and herbs. Maybe train apprentices if anyone's interested. Sarah's been asking about that. Her boy's recovery got her thinking maybe she could learn healing too. Kaya nodded approval. Good. We need more knowledge keepers. I won't be around forever, despite what my stubborn body seems to think. You'll outlive us all. Probably. But it's still good to plan ahead. Over the next months, Elira did exactly that. With help from Garrick and other settlement members, she built a small house on the edge of the community. One room for living, one room for patients, one room for growing and drying herbs. It wasn't fancy. The floor was packed dirt and the walls were rough-hewn logs. But it was hers in a way nothing had been since Black Hollow burned her life down. Sarah became her first apprentice, soaking up knowledge with the fierce determination of someone who'd almost lost what mattered most. 2 other women joined, wanting to learn skills that could save their families when winter came hard and help was days away. Garrick moved into a cabin next to Elira's healing house, claiming he needed to be close by for security purposes. Nobody believed that excuse, least of all Elira, but nobody questioned it either. They'd earned the right to build whatever relationship they wanted, at whatever pace worked for them. Sometimes word came from Black Hollow. The territorial doctors had completed their treatments. The new well was operational. 3 town council members had been convicted of corruption and removed from office. Mrs. Brennan had used her compensation money to establish a small school in her daughter's memory, teaching children to question authority and think critically instead of following fear. Small victories, small changes. Not enough to erase what had happened, but maybe enough to prevent it from happening again. And sometimes, very occasionally, people from Black Hollow made the long journey north to the settlement. They came sick or injured or desperate, having exhausted the limited medical knowledge available in their own town. Elira treated them all without asking their names or whether they'd been part of the mob. She'd meant what she said. She wouldn't refuse help to people who needed it. But she never went back. Black Hollow existed in her past, a chapter closed even if the scars remained. Her life was here now, in the mountains, with people who'd chosen her when she had nothing left to offer except truth and steady hands. One evening in late summer, Elira sat outside her healing house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The air smelled like pine and wildflowers. Somewhere nearby, children played and laughed, normal sounds from a normal life. Garrick emerged from his cabin carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and sat down beside her on the rough bench he'd built. Kaya says Marcus's sister is pregnant, he said, due in winter. She wants you there for the delivery. I'll be there. She also says if we're going to keep acting married, we might as well make it official. Elira nearly choked on her tea. She said that? More or less. Used more words and made it sound like practical advice instead of meddling. Garrick's ears were red. For the record, I didn't ask her to bring it up. But you've thought about it. Maybe. Have you? Elira looked at him, this man who'd saved her life and then kept saving it in small ways every day since. Who'd risked everything to stand between her and the people who wanted her dead. Who'd given her space to heal and time to decide who she wanted to be instead of just surviving who she'd been. Yeah, she said quietly. I've thought about it. And I'm terrified it'll end the same way it did with Thomas. That I'll lose you too. You might. Life doesn't come with guarantees. Garrick took her hand, his touch familiar now, comfortable. But you could also lose me to a falling tree, or a winter storm, or old age 50 years from now. Fear of loss doesn't make the living less worthwhile. When did you become wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being alone when I don't have to be. Elira leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. Ask me again in spring, when the worst of winter's passed and we've both had time to be sure. That's very practical of you. I'm a healer. Practical is what I do. They sat together watching the light fade, two people who'd found each other in darkness and decided to build something better in the light. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no magical transformation, no moment when everything suddenly became perfect. But it was real and honest. And theirs. Winter came hard that year, testing everyone's resolve. Elira delivered Marcus's niece in a difficult birth that took 12 hours and left her hands shaking with exhaustion. She treated frostbite and fevers and a hunter who'd broken his leg in 3 places. She lost a patient for the first time since arriving at the settlement, an elderly man whose lungs just gave out one cold January night. She grieved that loss privately, remembering that healing wasn't about winning every battle, but about fighting them with everything you had. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow and opening the passes. And on the first truly warm day, when wildflowers dotted the meadows and the creek ran clear and cold, Garrick asked her again. They stood at the edge of the settlement, looking out at the mountains that had become their home. Kaya waited nearby with half the settlement gathered as witnesses. Simple ceremony, no grand gestures, just 2 people making a promise to keep choosing each other, day after day, for as long as they had. So, Garrick said, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. What do you say? Elira looked at him, looked at the community they'd built together, looked at the healing house where she saved lives, and the cabin where she'd learned to live again. Looked at the future that was uncertain and scary and full of possibilities. I say yes, she answered. And the woman who'd been frozen by the world, left to die in winter, who'd survived fear and hatred and loss that should have broken her. That woman married a mountain man under the open sky and proved that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to let cruelty define who you become. They didn't live happily ever after because that's not how real life works. They lived, they fought and forgave and built something that mattered. They raised children and healed the sick and protected their community when threats came. They grew old together, Elira's hair turning silver while Garrick's beard went white. And decades later, when travelers asked about the legendary healer of Tall Pine Settlement, the one who'd survived exile and proven truth stronger than fear, the settlement's children would tell the story. But they always ended it the same way. Not with revenge or vindication or the villains getting what they deserved, but with a woman who chose healing over hatred, who built a life worth living instead of just surviving, and who proved that the real victory wasn't in defeating your enemies. It was in refusing to become one.